Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I am talking to John Strickland. John has worked in the airline industry for 38 years. He's worked for BA, KLM UK, British Midland, BCAL, Buzz, amongst others. And for the last 18 years, he's been a consultant to the airline industry and associated people within the airline industry, be they airports, investors, and all sorts of other people. How are you doing, John?
Well, I'm still alive, and at this point, I'm happy to say well. Of course, reeling as everybody is from the shock of what has happened to our beloved airline industry. I've never seen anything quite like it, but I have seen other crises before. This certainly beats all of them. It's like having several rolled into one and then adding a bit more. But I do remain cautiously optimistic about the industry's future.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And perhaps we could just jump in quickly. I mean, we're all used to seeing TV headlines, which by necessity condense things into very small sound bites. Could you give us some idea of the scale of change that we've seen in the UK and perhaps Europe to the airline industry thanks to COVID?
Well, it's simply massive. I mean, the airline industry, not only the UK and Europe, but around the world, has been literally brought to its knees, in many respects grounded. The number of airlines who have put out recent financial results, and they've talked about 95, in some cases, 100% of capacity being taken out. Of course, airlines are expensive entities, even when not flying, even when airlines are in a state of hibernation, they have a high level of cost because, of course, aircraft not flying still have to be maintained and still kept in a state of readiness for the time when hopefully they will be needed. And of course, revenue is not coming in the door either in terms of passenger revenue. Some airlines have turned to cargo and done more cargo flights than they would have done otherwise, and that's helped to offset the loss of passenger revenue. But overall, it really is a terrible situation. We're seeing phenomenal losses. In some cases, and it really is a minority, airlines have got financial resources to get themselves through it. For example, low-cost carriers like Wizz and Ryanair, large network carrier groups such as IAG are well founded financially. Even they have to look to gain more resources and cut their costs. Others have turned to government bailouts, and I think there are others, especially as we approach the winter, who will simply disappear from our skies and from the aviation landscape.
So this has but it's pretty much almost guaranteed that this will change the structure of airlines. We've seen things like the 747 and 380 not quite disappearing, but on their way to disappearing, presumably. And what about lower down? Will that change fleets and operations for people?
Everything is just so unclear at the present time. We're in this early stage of reaction to the crisis, which is one of decline and saving costs and avoiding cash burn. So, as you say, we've seen some of the largest aircraft, particularly the 747, disappearing from airlines' fleets for good. In the case even of the A380, which is a much younger aircraft, even there, Lufthansa is speculating about whether it may ground its entire fleet. It's already made a clear decision that over half of them will go. Air France has grounded an aircraft for good also. We will see, I think, over time, a restructuring of fleets. As I mentioned, on the long haul side, those aircraft actually seem too big, which is why they've disappeared. We may see the 787 from Boeing and the A350 from Airbus coming far more into their own. These already were the new generation aircraft. I felt perhaps they were, in some cases, a bit small, but it now seems that might be the right size for the foreseeable future. In the short haul arena, where Airbus and Boeing have, of course, the 737 and the A320 families, notwithstanding Boeing's current problems of grounding with the 737 MAX. These aircraft at least are in their newer versions, which are more fuel efficient than their predecessors. And we're seeing, particularly from the Airbus side, a much greater variety of missions for the A320 family, particularly the 321 Neo LR and the up-and-coming XLR. And I think in a few years' time, airlines will be looking for these aircraft to renew their fleets, to give them greater flexibility in choice of mission as to where they operate. But right now, nobody's in the business of buying new aircraft or taking delivery if they can possibly avoid it. We're seeing leases cancelled, aircraft return to lessors, not only aircraft grounded that are already in airlines' fleets, but new aircraft that were planned to be delivered maybe being deferred by a number of years if they're not cancelled. So it's a difficult time also for manufacturers. And I think we have to really gird our loins, batten down the hatches for a few years before we move to the next stage. I should say also, of course, in the regional aircraft arena, there are changes there too. We were going to see Bombardier, or rather we're going to see Embraer taken over by Boeing. That is now off. Embraer has the new E2 family of aircraft. Bombardier was subsumed by Airbus with regards to the A220. So there's some new aircraft coming through there that are already in service. Again, they're probably going to play a pivotal role in a kind of reconstruction and rebuilding of the industry in a few years' time.
So talking about, we've spoken about obviously the 747, 787, and the kind of A320, 737 families, and now a bit about Bombardier. Going, Flybe in the UK was a casualty pre-COVID. There have been various rumours about Flybe version 2 and other. How are we looking for that kind of regional carrier business in the UK?
Well, the regional carrier space is arguably, I think really without doubt, the most difficult one to be in, because it is by nature a smaller market segment. It's very subject to thinner and more seasonal traffic flows in many cases, yet the unit costs of operation, and thinking of course that airlines always talk about unit costs in terms of the cost of producing a seat. Of course, that is the unit against which revenue is typically generated in a passenger context. They are very much higher, even with the newer generation aircraft, as I mentioned, such as the A220 and the E2 family, and the newer generation turboprops too, with ATR and again Bombardier's Q400. There are not so many people who are willing to pay those higher prices to offset the higher seat costs, and some routes are only operated because they are flown as a public service obligation routes or some other form of subsidy on the basis of economic necessity. And perhaps that at least is a strong argument for the survival of regional carriers. They do perform, in many cases, a lifeline essential service, not only for communities from the point of view of access to health facilities, medical supplies, and so on, which are not available directly in small communities, but also as links for business and tourism. But it is a challenging space. I think Flybe in particular had a number of challenges even before the COVID crisis began to rear its head. It was a very large airline, I would say probably too large for what it could do. And that large fleet was made up of relatively modern aircraft, which on the one hand was good from a point of view of efficiency, but meant they had an enormous amount of cost. So we're seeing some of our routes now being taken up by other players, such as Logan Air and Blue Islands, and I think that will continue to be the case. But it'll remain, I think, the part of the industry that has the toughest path to follow.
Great. So we've spoken about the downturn and the damage to the industry. We've spoken about the downsizing of the fleets, and everyone, everyone in this industry feels every single day how depressed the whole thing is, really. But you speak to an awful lot of people at a lot of high levels in the airline world. What's the kind of consensus? If you were to gather the airline CEOs in a private room and close the door, what would they be chatting about? How would they be seeing the future, or when would they be seeing the future? Is there any? I mean, clearly none of us really know. But what's kind of the range of guesses, should we say?
Well, of course, their immediate concern is managing their businesses day to day, conserving cash, eliminating that cash drain which is going on when flights are not operated and revenue is not being generated. The industry in general, of course, is talking about a recovery which may not come before 2023. Others are talking about 2024 or later. The reality is nobody knows. I don't believe there's any econometric forecast out there that can tell us or give us any comfort. It's simply the fact that there are so many factors running together in this particular crisis: economic, medical, political, you name it, they're all there wrapped up together, making this very challenging. So I think most leaders do believe in some shape or form, even if the data is imprecise, but it's going to be a long-term recovery. The ones who have most foresight, I think, are right to assume the industry will be restructured. It won't be the same size, it won't be the same shape. The business models that we have today, I think, will become more fused. We'll take different elements, the best elements of each according to circumstance. to find a new way forward. But I think right now the teams around airline leaders will be doing an awful lot of scenario planning, not only in terms of volume of traffic, but what is that market going to look like? We've heard some airlines talking already, for example, about a lower level of business traffic in the future, particularly business class travel on long haul flights. If that does shrink, how will airlines still manage to extract a premium from those passengers, many of whom business traffic is so important for? What will low-cost carriers do in terms of maybe claiming more territory? We're seeing indications of that already, with airlines such as Wizz having announced recently the opening of several new bases and the plans to move into large airports like London Gatwick, where they were never operating before. There's a lot of flux right now, and I think more unusually than ever, it is a hand-to-mouth exercise of taking these day by day, week by week, and only trying to put together the medium-long term in a very general and flexible way. And I think that is something airlines will look for increasingly. Both aircraft, they give them a maximum flexibility in how they can be used, and human resources, the use of people, it needs to be flexible. The industry is innately cyclical. It's innately, in many markets, seasonal too. So the greater flexibility in terms of the use of your human resources and your capital is essential to be able to manage the ups and downs, which we have had always, but which we have even more as a result of this crisis.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things we always talk about at the Pilot Careers Live events that we run is that people who intend to make a career out of the airline industry, and generally the people we speak to want to make a career on the flight deck, we try and explain to them right from the beginning the importance of gathering as much data as possible so that you can make informed decisions. And I have to say, talking to someone like you and getting a view of the industry from a slightly different point of view than purely the flight deck is a really valuable thing. So if I may, as a message to people watching this, I'm going to pop up a couple of URLs and stuff on the screen. So if they want to follow you and see some of the stuff, then that's the website to go, jlsconsulting.co.uk, where there's a great series of industry blogs that are well worth following. And if you can't wait for the industry blogs and you want a much more kind of tactical approach to news, then I suggest they follow you on Twitter at John L. Strickland, caps J, L, and S in there. So is there anything?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn as well.
That's good. So are there any other places that people should look, or have you got it basically covered?
I mean, those are the places for me. I mean, I think keep well read. I think pilots, the challenge is you're sitting on that flight deck and very focused on the need to deliver that safe flight and manage your operational environment. But looking around and understanding the global environment in which your particular airline or operator is trading in really helps you in understanding of what is going on in the business and being more in touch with the evolving context of the industry.
I mean, we probably launched our events either kind of when you were setting up your consultancy or maybe even a couple of years before that. And we've seen over the years, we've seen 9/11, we've seen financial crisis, we've seen ups and downs. So clearly, anyone considering entering the profession now who will they be able to find a job now, that is, and thinking of a 30, 40-year career in the industry, I would certainly say that even post-COVID, they are likely to see something else coming along every 7 to 10 years. So it's probably a good industry to plan ahead, have a plan B, and to enjoy the good times and know that the not so good times are regularly around the corner every 7 to 12 years or so.
Oh, I think there's an absolute need for flexibility and resilience. And resilience, it's easy to say that you need it. In some ways, it only comes when you survive something that is pretty horrendous and you didn't imagine you were going to get through it. But you can use every difficult experience as a building block to reflect on. Certainly, it's what I'm doing now. I mean, none of us know the way this crisis is going to go, but I tell myself I have seen other crises before, be it the financial crisis, be it 9/11, the volcanic eruption, many other occasions when there have been terrorism outrages, airlines going bust for one reason or another. And we find there is life after these events. Of course, sadly, not every individual gets through it, but you do become, I think, battle hardened and try to take these things on and understand, as you said, that it's an industry that goes through good periods, it goes through bad periods.
Thank you very much for that, John. Thanks for joining us. I hope to speak to you again soon sometime.
Look forward to it.
So if you enjoyed that, if you thought it was useful, please give us a like, ask some questions down below, click subscribe, all that good stuff, and we'll be back soon. Thank you.